6 a.m. here in Singapore and 5 p.m. in Ferguson in Missouri, where state of emergency has been declared. This follows an outbreak of violence on Sunday evening after a vigil to mark the first anniversary of the death of the unarmed black teenager Michael Brown. Another 18-year-old black man, Tyrone Harris, is now in critical condition after being shot by police officers. He's been charged with assaulting the police. His father has described the claim as a bunch of lies. Let's cross over now live to Ferguson, and we're joined by the BBC's correspondent, Nick Bryant. Nick, what more can you tell us about the status of Tyrone Harris and the police officers who shot him?
He's in a critical condition. He's being treated in a hospital nearby. But as he was being treated, as he was in that critical condition, the police decided to bring charges against him. 10 counts, including firing at a car and also assaulting police officers. What the police say happened is that gunfire erupted between, when there was an exchange of fire between two rival groups in Ferguson. The police have described them not as protesters but criminals. A car full of plainclothes policemen, an unmarked car, decided to give chase, and it chased one of these individuals across a car park. He then, according to the police, started firing at them, and at that point the police returned fire and hit him. And they arrested him and they took him off to hospital. The police chief is saying again that those groups were criminals. They had nothing to do with what had largely been a peaceful protest up until that gunfire erupted.
What is the situation right now in Ferguson, Nick? There's still a tremendous level of distrust between law enforcement and the community.
There really is a great level of mistrust, and that is exemplified by the comments of Tyrone Harris's father, who's come out and says that police version of events is a bunch of lies, as he put it. He claims that his son was unarmed. The police say that he was carrying a stolen firearm. They're also saying that he was running away, running for his life, as the father put it. And there are many people in this community who would believe that version of events rather than the police's version of events. Such is the level of mistrust here in Ferguson, which has to be America's angriest racial fault line right now. There is a sense of foreboding. It's late afternoon here now, but daytime is very different in Ferguson than nighttime, and that is when in the past we have seen trouble. And as a precaution, the authorities here have decided to declare a state of emergency. It's not because there's mayhem here, it's not because the situation at the moment is out of control. It's an administrative and precautionary move which allows certain things to happen quickly in the event of further violence.
Nick Bryant with the latest updates from Ferguson, Missouri. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsday.
Attorney for the family of Michael Brown, Benjamin Crump. I want to begin with CNN's Brian Todd. He has more on the violence that's rocking Ferguson. Brian, give us the latest.
Brianna, tonight, Ferguson is boiling with tension. We're looking toward the evening hours when darkness descends for any sign of the violence that we saw last night. Police there are under enormous pressure tonight to head off any potential violence and not let it escalate if anything does happen. Last night's shootings have put everyone in that city on edge. Now, we have to warn viewers, some of the video you're about to see is graphic. One spark and chaos ensues in Ferguson. Muzzle flashes are seen near a white pickup truck. Two groups start battling on the street, unleashing what the St. Louis County Police Chief calls a remarkable amount of gunfire. It sends protesters and police scurrying for cover. One suspect then allegedly fires at undercover police. They return fire, and he's wounded. That eruption triggered a tense standoff between police and local crowds.
We ready for what? We ready for what?
Bottles and bricks thrown at police, who responded by deploying smoke. It marred what had been a peaceful day of protest, marking the one-year anniversary of Michael Brown's death. As protests and arrests continued Monday, the violence frustrated advocates who want to keep the focus on reducing police shootings.
Many of the people who have their own agendas, who do wish to escalate violence, they mix in with a lot of the peaceful protesters, so it is difficult. And particularly for law enforcement who has no idea, oftentimes, who is who.
Police say the wounded suspect is 18-year-old Tyrone Harris Jr. from St. Louis, who was charged today with 10 criminal counts. Contacted by CNN, Harris's aunt denies he shot at police, says he wasn't even carrying a gun. St. Louis County Police Chief John Belmar, clearly frustrated, is appealing for the community to rein in troublemakers.
We can't sustain this as a community as we move forward. We have other individuals out there who are armed right now. They're part of this group.
Police advocates say all eyes will be on how the Ferguson and St. Louis County Police respond during these tense days and nights surrounding the anniversary.
The police in Ferguson and the surrounding area are under tremendous pressure.
How measured do they have to be? Do they have to not use force during moments where they normally would?
Yeah, I think that when you start asking police officers to alter the way that they've been trained to react, alter the way that they have to act to protect themselves and protect others, you run into more problems.
Now, Ferguson City Council member Wesley Bell tells us since last year, he has noticed that Ferguson police have engaged the community more. They're doing more community policing. They know people's names in the neighborhood. They're likely going to need every ounce of that goodwill in the tense days and nights ahead surrounding this anniversary. Brianna?
And Brian, I know that you've spoken to relatives of the suspect who was shot. What did they tell you?
Yeah, I spoke to Tyrone Harris's aunt just a short time ago and to his father very briefly. His aunt not only denies that he shot at police, she says that Tyrone Harris was there just to attend the Michael Brown memorial events. She says he was a close friend of Michael Brown's. The father was agitated, really just trying to process everything that happened. He did not want to speak to us and hung up the phone.
All right, Brian Todd, thanks so much. Let's go to Ferguson now. CNN's Sarah Seidner is there for us. Sarah, there's already been many arrests today. What are you seeing right now?
Well, the arrests aren't happening here in Ferguson. They're actually happening in Clayton, where the St. Louis County Courthouse is, and people have been going there, and this was purposeful. They said that they were going to have civil disobedience today. This day was set aside for that. The weekend was supposed to be peaceful, prayerful marches. Today was not supposed to be that. They were expecting to be arrested. More than 50 people arrested, including some very prominent people who have been front and center in this movement, and some of the civil rights leaders that we've known for many, many years, including DeRay and a few people who have been at the head of this movement. They all are in jail, arrested for civil disobedience, but that is exactly what they had planned to do. So no surprise there, although 56 people, quite a few people getting arrested because of this. And of course, that violence that happened overnight, the police really saying, look, we believe these were not people who were part of the protest. This was something else, that there was some sort of battle between two groups in the streets that were several hundred yards from where the protesters were engaging police on the police line, that these were, as they put it, criminals who ended up firing at police, and police fired back. Brianna?
Sarah, you, I know, have been covering Ferguson for a year now. There is a new chief of police, but we're still seeing so many of the practices that the Justice Department flagged going on with arrests that tend to target African Americans more than whites. Do people feel that nothing has changed there?
No, there's a very big divide here. There are some folks who are trying to work together to try to figure out how to go forward. There are some residents here who think the city has shown change, but not enough. And there are others who believe that some of the changes are superficial. There has been a change in government. You know, the population is 67% African American, and now the government actually reflects that. The city government, you have an interim city manager who's African American. You have a new judge, he's African American. You have a new interim city police chief, he's African American. You have two new city council members, they're both African American, voted in recently in April. So you have changes, visible changes, but some folks are saying just because you have people of color in those positions doesn't necessarily mean that their policies are going to change and affect people, you know, everyday people, everyday citizens on the ground. So there is still a divide as to whether things are changing or just changing superficially. Brianna?
Sarah Seidner for us in Ferguson. The Justice Department and the Attorney General are closely watching these developments there in Ferguson. CNN Justice correspondent Evan Perez working this part of the story. What are they keeping an eye on, Evan?
Well, Brianna, you know, one of the problems with Ferguson is that, you know, it takes a long time for you to cure some of these problems that took years and years and years to develop. Loretta Lynch, the Attorney General, was in Pittsburgh today trying to highlight one of these programs that the Justice Department supports that is aimed at increasing and helping improve community policing around the country. And she spoke out against the violence that happened in Ferguson. Here's how she put it.
I strongly condemn the violence that was perpetrated against the community, including the police officers in Ferguson last evening. Now, as we have all seen over recent months and years, not only does violence obscure any message of peaceful protest, it places the community as well as the officers who are seeking to protect it in harm's way.
And Brianna, one of the important things for Loretta Lynch is to try to project to the country, really, that the Justice Department is even-handed in this. So she's speaking out not only against people, against the behavior of police when they do wrong, but also against people who are trying to do violence against police officers.
What has the Justice Department been able to really accomplish here in a year, Evan?
You know, that's a great question. It's in March of 2015, so just only about 5-6 months ago, the Justice Department issued this scathing report into the practices of the Ferguson Police Department. And really now what they've been doing these last few months is negotiating with the city to try to put together a court-monitored plan to improve the police. And if you remember, this terrible system in the courts, in the municipal courts there, which were viewed as essentially taxing poor people every time they drove through Ferguson. So a few things that are still to be done is, for example, changing their use of force guidelines there, trying to make sure that the police that are brought up on misconduct charges, that the community knows what happens to them, and also to stop using arrest warrants for failing to appear. These are simply if you didn't pay your ticket and you failed to show up in court, you got fined again, and therefore it was essentially a tax on a lot of people there in Ferguson. That is all work that needs to be done. We should mention that Ferguson just last week, according to the mayor there, they had rejected the first offer from the Justice Department for an agreement, and now they're still working on trying to figure out how they're going to come to a court monitoring plan.
All right, Evan Perez, thanks so much for your report. I want to talk about all of this now with the attorney who represents the family of Michael Brown, Benjamin Crump, with us now. Ben, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you give us a sense of where Michael Brown's family is on this, where his parents, how his parents have reacted to what they saw last night?
Well, as you know, Brianna, they went through a whole weekend of commemorative activities, very peaceful, trying to honor the legacy of their son, Michael Brown Jr., on the eve of his one-year anniversary of his tragic killing. And everything was peaceful, everything was fine, and as they have always done, they asked people to exercise their First Amendment constitutional rights to free speech in a positive, productive manner. With that being said, they are keenly aware, as many in Ferguson, that the city rejected the findings and the settlement offer of the Justice Department with the consent decree right before this anniversary. So really it's one of those situations where the community is saying, what has changed?
So maybe they don't understand, or maybe they don't support the violence, but they're understanding some of the sentiment that is making people upset?
Well, I think they are still frustrated with no one being held accountable for the death of Michael Brown Jr. But also, when you look at all these findings for the city to say, we did not have these practices, these patterning practices that we believe led to the tragic killing of an unarmed African American in broad daylight, and namely their son. Then you say, well, what has changed when you just take away from what people see as superficial things, and they appreciate and respect everybody trying to progress, and they know it's going to take time. We have now an African-American intern manager, city manager, African-American intern police chief. They're all intern, and so the question is this going to be just something for the cameras, and when everybody leaves, it's back to business as usual? These people have seen this before, so they want to know if there really is going to be positive change. And so this 1 year anniversary is a time to see what we have learned and how far we have come.
Ben, hang with me just a second. I have more questions for you. I need to get a quick break in. For instance, Missouri has declared, a police officers association declared in Missouri yesterday, Darren Wilson Day. We'll get Ben Crump, the lawyer for Michael Brown's family. We'll get his reaction after this break. We're following breaking news. A state of emergency declared in St. Louis County following a night of violence in Ferguson. Peaceful protests gave way to chaos and gunfire. Police shot one man who they say fired repeatedly at officers. 18-year-old Tyrone Harris is in critical condition. He's been charged with 10 counts. And we're back now with the attorney representing the family of Michael Brown, Benjamin Crump. Ben, I wonder what you think, or really what the family thinks, and if they've even heard of this police officers association in Columbia, Missouri, declaring yesterday Darren Wilson Day. Your reaction to that?
Well, certainly everybody has a right to express their First Amendment rights, but it was very painful for his family. I know his mother, Leslie McSpadden, expressed a painful reaction to the killer of her son, her unarmed son, being celebrated. It was very troubling and very painful for them, especially when you consider they're going on an emotional roller coaster now. Even getting through Sunday was very difficult because that was the 1 year anniversary, and those time frames really get in your heart. When you think about last year this time, my son had all the hope and promise, and now he's gone forever.
Darren Wilson, as you know, recently spoke out in an extensive profile saying that he didn't really think about Michael Brown, who Michael Brown was as a person, because, quote, it doesn't matter at this point. What did Brown's mother and father think about those comments in that profile?
Well, I know they would want, as they did in their events commemorating Michael Brown this weekend, with other parents who lost children to senseless gun violence. We'll hope that the people who are supposed to protect and serve us all will consider their son like he considers any other citizen. And so it just goes to the crux of the matter of what we're dealing with here. We have to have better community policing, and we all have to accept responsibility for saying we can't keep things occurring the way they are occurring, whether it's in Arlington, Texas, Baltimore. You know, in the year after Michael Brown's death, we've seen so many killings of unarmed people of color that you do have to ask, are we moving forward? Are we getting better? Or are we seeing the same thing repeat itself and no one being held accountable? And so I think that's what you see. A lot of the expression that's coming out on this 1 year anniversary is based specifically on that, Brianna, that people are saying it's happening more and more. It's not happening less. It's going to almost an epic proportion that we're seeing every week. Another unarmed African-American being killed, whether it's in Cincinnati, Arlington, Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I mean, it's all around America.
Has anything changed? That's a question we will be talking about in this hour. Ben Crump, attorney for Michael Brown's family, thanks so much for joining us. I want to get more now with CNN law enforcement analyst Cedric Alexander and St. Louis City Alderman Antonio French. You were there, Antonio, last night as this gunfire erupted. Describe it.
Yeah, it was very chaotic. You know, there was some looting and some breaking in of some businesses beforehand. I made my way down to where one of the businesses had been broken in and stood in front of the broken glass to make sure no more looters got in. I wasn't there more than a few minutes before gunshots rang out about 75 or so feet away from me. It was just a few at first, and then more proceeded, and then it just seemed like we were surrounded by gunfire. And people just went running. And when the dust cleared, we learned that someone had been shot across the street, and then later we found out it was officer involved.
Cedric, I want you to look at the video of the arrests today in St. Louis. You had demonstrators who were demanding the dissolution of the Ferguson Police Department. Do you think the arrests were appropriate?
Well, I can't tell you whether they were appropriate or not, even though people were exercising their First Amendment rights. And whatever they may have done there, I'm going to make some assumption that they went outside of the law. But here's the bigger issue here as it relates to Ferguson in and of itself. It is a community that is still healing, a community that was hurt for a period of time. And just a year ago, there was the horrible death of Michael Brown, a community that went into a rage. And since that time, yes, some changes have been made. You have a new interim chief in there who is making an attempt and starting to build some bridges with community folks there, but he's only been there for 2 or 3 weeks. So those people who are in place are very new, but the pain that exists there in Ferguson is very long-standing. So it's going to take some time in order to continue to build that trust and build that relationship, but we can never give up to the fact that we can't do anything. It's a lot still left to be done.
All right, Antonio French, Cedric Alexander, thanks so much to both of you for joining us. Coming up,
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.